The invasion. Very well then, atheism is too simple. And I will tell you another view that is also too simple. It is the view I call Christianity and water. The view which simply says there is a good God in heaven and everything is all right, leaving out all the difficult and terrible doctrines about sin and hell and the devil and the redemption. Both these are boys' philosophies. It is no good asking for a simple religion. After all, real things are not simple. They look simple, but they are not. The table I am sitting at looks simple, but ask a scientist to tell you what it is really made of, all about the atoms and how the light waves rebound from them and hit my eye and what they do to the optic nerve and what it does to my brain. And of course, you find that what we call seeing a table lands you in mysteries and complications which you can hardly get to the end of. A child saying a child's prayer looks simple, and if you are content to stop there, well and good. But if you are not, and the modern world usually is not, if you want to go on and ask what is really happening, then you must be prepared for something difficult. If we ask for something more than simplicity, it is silly then to complain that the something more is not simple. Very often, however, this silly procedure is adopted by people who are not silly, but who consciously or unconsciously want to destroy Christianity. Such people put up a version of Christianity suitable for a child of 6 and make that the object of their attack. When you try to explain the Christian doctrine as it really is held by an instructed adult, they then complain that you are making their heads turn round and that it is all too complicated, and that if there really were a God, they are sure he would have made religion simple because simplicity is so beautiful, etc., etc. You must be on your guard against these people, for they will change their ground every minute and only waste your time. Notice too, their idea of God, making religion simple, as if religion was something God invented and not his statement to us of certain quite unalterable facts about his own nature. Besides being complicated, reality, in my experience, is usually odd. It is not neat, not obvious, not what one would expect. For instance, when you have grasped that the Earth and the other planets all go around the Sun, you would naturally expect that all the planets were made to match, all at equal distances from each other, say, or distances that regularly increased, or all the same size, or else getting bigger or smaller as you go farther from the Sun. In fact, you find no rhyme or reason that we can see about either the sizes or the distances. And some of them have one moon, one has 4, one has 2, some have none, and one has a ring. Reality, in fact, is usually something you could not have guessed. That is one of the reasons I believe Christianity. It is a religion you could not have guessed. If it offered us just the kind of universe we had always expected, I should feel we were making it up. But in fact, it is not the sort of thing anyone would have made up. It has just that queer twist about it that real things have. So let us leave behind all these boys' philosophies, these over-simple answers. The problem is not simple, and the answer is not going to be simple either. What is the problem? A universe that contains much that is obviously bad and apparently meaningless, but containing creatures like ourselves who know that it is bad and meaningless. There are only 2 views that face all the facts. One is the Christian view, that this is a good world that has gone wrong, but still retains the memory of what it ought to have been. The other is the view called dualism. Dualism means the belief that there are 2 equal and independent powers at the back of everything, one of them good and the other bad, and that this universe is the battlefield in which they fight, an endless war. I personally think that next to Christianity, dualism is the manifest and most sensible creed on the market, but it has a catch in it. The two powers, or spirits, or gods, the good one and the bad one, are supposed to be quite independent. They both existed from all eternity. Neither of them made the other. Neither of them has any more right than the other to call itself God. Each presumably thinks it is good and thinks the other bad. One of them likes hatred and cruelty, the other likes love and mercy, and each backs its own view. Now, what do we mean when we call one of them the good power and the other the bad power? Either we are merely saying that we happen to prefer the one to the other, like preferring beer to cider, or else we are saying that whatever the two powers think about it, and whichever we humans at the moment happen to like, one of them is actually wrong, actually mistaken in regarding itself as good. Now, if we mean merely that we happen to prefer the first, then we must give up talking about good and evil at all. For good means what you ought to prefer, quite regardless of what you happen to like at any given moment. If being good meant simply joining the side you happen to fancy for no real reason, then good would not deserve to be called good. So we must mean that one of the two powers is actually wrong and the other actually right. But the moment you say that, you are putting into the universe a third thing in addition to the two powers, some law or standard or rule of good which one of the powers conforms to and the other fails to conform to. But since the two powers are judged by this standard, then this standard, or the being who made this standard, is farther back and higher up than either of them, and he will be the real God. In fact, what we meant by calling them good and bad turns out to be that one of them is in a right relation to the real ultimate God, and the other in a wrong relation to him. The same point can be made in a different way. If dualism is true, then the bad power must be a being who likes badness for its own sake, just because it is bad. The nearest we can get to it is in cruelty, but in real life, people are cruel for one of two reasons. Either because they are sadists, that is, because they have a sexual perversion, which makes cruelty a cause of sensual pleasure to them, or else for the sake of something they are going to get out of it, money or power or safety. But pleasure, money, power, and safety are all, as far as they go, good things. The badness consists in pursuing them by the wrong method, or in the wrong way, or too much. I do not mean, of course, that the people who do this are not desperately wicked. I do mean that wickedness, when you examine it, turns out to be the pursuit of some good in the wrong way. You can be good for the mere sake of goodness. You cannot be bad for the mere sake of badness. You can do a kind action when you are not feeling kind and when it gives you no pleasure simply because kindness is right. But no one ever did a cruel action simply because cruelty is wrong, only because cruelty was pleasant or useful to him. In other words, badness cannot succeed even in being bad in the same way in which goodness is good. Goodness is, so to speak, itself. Badness is only spoiled goodness. And there must be something good first before it can be spoiled. We call sadism a sexual perversion, but you must first have the idea of a normal sexuality before you can talk of it being perverted. And you can see which is the perversion, because you can explain the perverted from the normal, and cannot explain the normal from the perverted. It follows that this bad power, who is supposed to be on an equal footing with the good power and to love badness in the same way as the good power loves goodness, is a mere bogey. In order to be bad, he must have good things to want, and then to pursue in the wrong way, he must have impulses which were originally good in order to be able to pervert them. But if he is bad, He cannot supply himself either with good things to desire or with good impulses to pervert. He must be getting both from the good power, and if so, then he is not independent. He is part of the good power's world. He was made either by the good power or by some power above them both. Put it more simply still, to be bad, he must exist and have intelligence and will, but existence, intelligence, and will are in themselves good. Therefore, he must be getting them from the good power. Even to be bad, he must borrow or steal from his opponent. And do you now begin to see why Christianity has always said that the devil is a fallen angel? That is not a mere story for children. It is a real recognition of the fact that evil is a parasite, not an original thing. The powers which enable evil to carry on are powers given it by goodness. All the things which enable a bad man to be effectively bad are in themselves good things: resolution, cleverness, good looks, existence itself. That is why dualism, in a strict sense, will not work. But I freely admit that real Christianity, as distinct from Christianity and water, go much nearer to dualism than people think. One of the things that surprised me when I first read the New Testament seriously was that it talked so much about a dark power in the universe, a mighty evil spirit who was held to be the power behind death and disease and sin. The difference is that Christianity thinks this dark power was created by God and was good when he was created and went wrong. Christianity agrees with dualism that this universe is at war, but it does not think this is a war between independent powers. It thinks it is a civil war, a rebellion, and that we are living in a part of the universe occupied by the rebel. Enemy occupied territory. That is what this world is. Christianity is the story of how the rightful king has landed. You might say landed in disguise, and is calling us all to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. When you go to church, you are really listening in to the secret wireless from our friends. That is why the enemy is so anxious to prevent us from going. He does it by playing on our conceit and laziness, intellectual snobbery. I know someone will ask me, do you really mean at this time of day to reintroduce our old friend the devil, hoofs and horns and all? Well, what the time of day has to do with it, I do not know, and I'm not particular about the hooves and the horns. But in other respects, my answer is yes, I do. I do not claim to know anything about his personal appearance. If anybody really wants to know him better, I would say to that person, don't worry. If you really want to, you will. Whether you'll like it when you do is another question. The cardinal virtues. The previous section was originally composed to be given as a short talk on the air. If you're allowed to talk for only 10 minutes, pretty well everything else has to be sacrificed to brevity. One of my chief reasons for dividing morality up into 3 parts, with my picture of the ship sailing in convoy, was that this seemed the shortest way of covering the ground. Here I want to give some idea of another way in which the subject has been divided by old writers, which was too long to use in my talk, but which is a very good one. According to this longer scheme, there are 7 virtues. 4 of them are called cardinal virtues, and the remaining 3 are called theological virtues. The cardinal ones are those which all civilized people recognize. The theological are those which, as a rule, only Christians know about. I shall deal with the theological ones later. At present, I am talking about the 4 cardinal virtues. The word cardinal has nothing to do with cardinals in the Roman Church. It comes from a Latin word meaning the hinge of a door. These were called cardinal virtues because they are, as we should say, pivotal. They are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. Nowadays, most people think of prudence as one of the virtues. In fact, because Christ said we could only get into his world by being like children, many Christians have the idea that provided you are good, it does not matter being a fool. But that is a misunderstanding. In the first place, most children show plenty of prudence about doing the things that they are really interested in and think them out quite sensibly. In the second place, as St. Paul points out, Christ never meant that we were to remain children in intelligence. On the contrary, he told us to be not only as harmless as doves, but also as wise as serpents. He wants a child's heart, but a grown up's head. He wants us to be simple, single minded, affectionate, and teachable, as good children are. But he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job and in first class fighting trim. The fact that you are given money to a charity or giving money to a charity does not mean that you need not try to find out whether the charity is a fraud or not. The fact that what you are thinking about is God himself, for example, when you are praying, does not mean that you can be content with the same babyish ideas which you had when you were 5 years old. It is, of course, quite true that God will not love you any less or have less use for you if you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. He has room for people with very little sense, but he wants every one of us to use what sense they have. The proper motto is not be good, sweet maid, and let who can be clever, but be good, sweet maid, and don't forget that this involves being as clever as you can. God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than of any other slackers. If you are thinking of becoming a Christian, I warn you that you are embarking on something which is going to take the whole of you, brains and all. But fortunately, it works the other way around. Anyone who is honestly trying to be a Christian will soon find his intelligence being sharpened. One of the reasons why it needs no special education to be a Christian is that Christianity is an education in itself. That is why an uneducated believer like Bunyan was able to write a book that has astonished the whole world. Temperance is, unfortunately, one of those words that has changed its meanings. It now usually means teetotalism. But in the days when the second cardinal virtue was christened, temperance meant nothing of the sort. Temperance referred not specially to drink, but to all pleasures, and it meant not abstaining, but going the right length and no further. It is a mistake to think that Christians ought all to be teetotalers. Mohammedanism, not Christianity, is the teetotal religion. Of course, it may be the duty of a particular Christian or of any Christian at a particular time to abstain from strong drink, either because he is the sort of man who cannot drink at all without drinking too much, or because he wants to give the money to the poor, or because he is with people who are inclined to drunkenness and must not encourage them by drinking himself. The whole point is that he is abstaining for a good reason from something which he does not condemn and which he likes to see other people enjoying. One of the marks of a certain type of bad man is that he cannot give up a thing himself without wanting everyone else to give it up. That is not the Christian way. An individual Christian may see fit to give up all sorts of things for special reasons, marriage, or meat, or beer, or the cinema. But the moment he starts saying the things are bad in themselves or looking down his nose at others who do use them, he has taken the wrong turning. One great piece of mischief has been done by the modern restriction of the word temperance to the question of drink. It helps people to forget that you can be just as intemperate about lots of other things. A man who makes his golf or his motorcycle the centre of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothing or bridge or her dog, is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening. Of course, it does not show on the outside so easily. Bridge mania or golf mania do not make you fall down in the middle of the road, but God is not deceived by externals. Justice means much more than the sort of thing that goes on in law courts. It is the old name for everything we should now call fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises, and all that side of life. And fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. You will notice, of course, that you cannot practice any of the other virtues very long without bringing this one into play. There is one further point about the virtues that ought to be noticed. There is a difference between doing some particular just or temperate action and being a just or temperate man. Someone who is not a good tennis player may now and then make a good shot. What you mean by a good player is the man whose eye and muscles and nerves have been so trained by making innumerable good shots that they can now be relied upon. They have a certain tone or quality which is there even when he is not playing, just as a mathematician's mind has a certain habit and outlook which is there even when he is not doing mathematics. In the same way, a man who perseveres in doing just actions gets in the end a certain quality of character. Now it is that quality rather than the particular actions which we mean when we talk of virtue. This distinction is important for the following reason. If we thought only of the particular actions, we might encourage three wrong ideas. We might think that, provided you did the right thing, it did not matter how or why you did it, whether you did it willingly or unwillingly, sulkily or cheerfully, through fear of public opinion or for its own sake. But the truth is that right actions done for the wrong reasons do not help to build the internal quality or character called a virtue. And it is this quality or character that really matters. If the bad tennis player hits very hard, not because he sees that a very hard stroke is required, but because he has lost his temper, his stroke might possibly, by luck, help him win that particular game, but he will not be helping himself to become a reliable player. 2. We might think that God wanted simply obedience to a set of rules, whereas he really wants people of a particular sort. And 3. We might think that the virtues were necessary only for this present life, that in the other world we could stop being just because there's nothing to quarrel about, and stop being brave because there is no danger. Now, it is quite true that there will probably be no occasions for just or courageous acts in the next world, but there will be every occasion for being the sort of people that we can become only as the result of doing such acts here. The point is not that God will refuse you admission to his eternal world if you have not got certain qualities of character. The point is that if people have not got at least the beginnings of those qualities inside them, then no possible external condition could make a heaven for them. That is, could make them happy with the deep, strong, unshakable kind of happiness for which God intends us. The necessity of chivalry. The word chivalry has meant, at different times, a good many different things, from heavy cavalry to giving a woman a seat in a train. But if we want to understand chivalry as an ideal distinct from other ideals, if we want to isolate that particular conception of the man comme il faut, which was the special contribution of the Middle Ages to our culture, we cannot do better than turn to the words addressed to the greatest of all the imaginary knights in Malory's Morte d'Arthur. Thou wert the meekest man, says Sir Ector to the dead Lancelot. Thou wert the meekest man that ever ate in hall among ladies, and thou wert the sternest knight to thy mortal foe that ever put spear in the rest. The important thing about this ideal is, of course, the double demand it makes on human nature. The knight is a man of blood and iron, a man familiar with the sight of smashed faces and the ragged stumps of lopped off limbs. He is also a demure, almost a maiden-like guest in hall, a gentle, modest, unobtrusive man. He is not a compromise or happy mean between ferocity and meekness. He is fierce to the nth and meek to the nth. When Launcelot heard himself pronounced the best knight in the world, he wept as he had been a child that had been beaten. What, you may ask, is the relevance of this ideal to the modern world? It is terribly relevant. It may or may not be practicable. The Middle Ages notoriously failed to obey it. But it is certainly practical. Practical as the fact that men in a desert must find water or die. Let us be quite clear that the ideal is a paradox. Most of us, having grown up among the ruins of this chivalrous tradition, were taught in our youth that a bully is always a coward. Our first week at school refuted this lie, along with its corollary that a truly brave man is always gentle. It is a pernicious lie because it misses the real novelty and originality of the medieval demand upon human nature. Worse still, it represents as a natural fact something which is really a human ideal, nowhere fully attained and nowhere attained at all without arduous discipline. It is refuted by history and experience. Homer's Achilles knows nothing of the demand that the brave should also be the modest and the merciful. He kills men as they cry for quarter, or takes them prisoner to kill them at leisure. The heroes of the sagas know nothing of it. They are as stern to inflict as they are stubborn to endure. Attila had a custom of fiercely rolling his eyes, as if he wished to enjoy the terror which he inspired. Even the Romans, when gallant enemies fell into their hands, led them through the streets for a show and cut their throats in cellars when the show was over. At school, we found that the hero of the first 15 might well be a noisy, arrogant, overbearing bully. In the last war, we often found that the man who was invaluable in a show was a man for whom in peacetime we could not easily find room except in Dartmoor. Such is heroism by nature, heroism outside the chivalrous tradition. The medieval ideal brought together two things which have no natural tendency to gravitate toward one another. It brought them together for that very reason. It taught humility and forbearance to the great warrior, because everyone knew by experience how much he usually needed that lesson. It demanded valor of the urbane and modest man, because everyone knew that he was as likely as not to be a milksop. In so doing, the Middle Ages fixed on the one hope of the world. It may or may not be possible to produce by the 1,000 men who combine the two sides of Launcelot's character. But if it is not possible, then all talk of any lasting happiness or dignity in human society is pure moonshine. If we cannot produce Lancelots, humanity falls into two sections: those who can deal in blood and iron but cannot be meek in hall, and those who are meek in hall but useless in battle. For the third class, who are both brutal in peace and cowardly in war, need not here be discussed. When this dissociation of the two halves of Lancelot occurs, history becomes a horribly simple affair. The ancient history of the Near East is like that. Hardy barbarians swarm down from their highlands and obliterate a civilization. Then they become civilized themselves and go soft. Then a new wave of barbarians comes down and obliterates them. Then the cycle begins over again. Modern machinery will not change this cycle. It will only enable the same thing to happen on a larger scale. Indeed, nothing much else can ever happen if the stern and the meek fall into two mutually exclusive classes. And never forget that this is their natural condition. The man who combines both characters, the knight, is a work not of nature, but of art, of that art which has human beings instead of canvas or marble for its medium. In the world today, there is a liberal or enlightened tradition which regards the combative side of man's nature as a pure atavistic evil and scouts the chivalrous sentiment as part of the false glamour of war. And there is also a neo-heroic tradition which scouts the chivalrous sentiment as a weak sentimentality, which would raise from its grave, its shallow and unquiet grave, the pre-Christian ferocity of Achilles by a modern invocation. Already in our own Kipling, the heroic qualities of his favourite subalterns are dangerously removed from meekness and urbanity. One cannot quite imagine the adult Stalky in the same room with the best of Nelson's captains, still less with Sidney. These two tendencies between them weave the world's shroud. Happily, we live better than we write, better than we deserve. Lancelot is not yet irrecoverable. To some of us, this war brought a glorious surprise in the discovery that after 20 years of cynicism and cocktails, the heroic virtues were still unimpaired in the younger generation and ready for exercise the moment they were called upon. Yet with this sternness, there is much meekness. From all I hear, the young pilots in the RAF, to whom we owe our life from hour to hour, are not less but more urbane and modest than the 1915 model. In short, there is still life in the tradition which the Middle Ages inaugurated, but the maintenance of that life depends in part on knowing that the knightly character is art, not nature. Something that needs to be achieved, not something that can be relied upon to happen. And this knowledge is specially necessary as we grow more democratic. In previous centuries, the vestiges of chivalry were kept alive by a specialized class from whom they spread to other classes, partly by imitation and partly by coercion. Now, it seems, the people must either be chivalrous on its own resources or else choose between the two remaining alternatives of brutality and softness. This is, indeed, part of the general problem of a classless society, which is too seldom mentioned. Will its ethos be a synthesis of what was best in all the classes, or a mere pool with the sediment of all and the virtues of none? But that is too large a subject for the fag end of an article. My theme is chivalry. I have tried to show that this old tradition is practical and vital. The ideal embodied in Lancelot is escapism in a sense never dreamed of by those who use that word. It offers the only possible escape from a world divided between wolves who do not understand and sheep who cannot defend the things which make life desirable. There was, to be sure, a rumour in the last century that wolves would gradually become extinct by some natural process, but this seems to have been an exaggeration.